Welcome to the Lanterman Coalition's interviews with candidates for the next governor of California. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for joining us today.
My honor. Thanks for having me.
Coming to chat with us. I'm Jordan Lindsay, Executive Director of the ARC of California and Chair of the Lanterman Coalition. The coalition is made up of statewide agencies that represent people with developmental disabilities, and we're very happy to be chatting today about the vision for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in California. For those watching online on Facebook Live, a quick introduction of who else is here in the room. If we're able, we could try to show the camera. There's a small audience here of people from across the community, across the state, who are joining us, and also Futures Explored, Futures Films, who is, oh, very nice, 360 view, clever.
Well done.
Who is training individuals with developmental disabilities to be filmmakers. And many thanks to the Urban Hive for hosting us today in this great location. Today, I and a few others in the room will ask the Lieutenant Governor questions. And if you are watching online, then we'll hopefully have some minutes at the end for you to ask your questions as well. So just type it into the feed online if you want, and write your name and what city you're from as well if you want to ask those online. Okay.
Thank you.
The intellectual and developmental disability community, it cuts through all walks of life.
Yeah.
Rich, poor, liberal, conservative, far northern California, Central Valley, San Diego. We all have experiences with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in our life. I just want to ask you, to begin with, what is your professional and or personal experience with people with developmental disabilities?
Goes back many, many years. My mother, who was 19 when she had me, she was single, divorced, raising 2 kids on her own a few years after that, worked for the DeBalt family with aid to adoption of special kids. This was a big part of my life growing up, people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. She drove a deep consciousness in this space in my earliest years. As a consequence, that's followed me, not just in terms of my professional life as a small business owner, that has hired people with developmental disabilities, but in my public service as a former county supervisor, 2-term mayor that hired people with developmental disabilities, as well as being the lieutenant governor. I am involved with Best Buddies, have been for years and years. I was the executive chairman of the World Games of the Special Olympics, brought the World Games to Los Angeles, raised millions of dollars in that effort. And have been very proud of the work that organizations large and small, including one I'm involved with in Marin County called Beyond Differences, have done to make the life of this state and the nation much better. So I have great respect and admiration for all of you and the work you're doing, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here. And as I say, I didn't come to this as a candidate for governor. It's been a big cause and focus of a big part of my life. Great.
You mentioned employment and employing people with developmental disabilities. So I want to jump to a question. How can, if you are elected governor, how can the state be a model employer for individuals who are ready, willing, and able to work?
Yeah. I give Maria Shriver a lot of credit as a former First Lady for raising the bar of expectation, but with respect, we fell short of a lot of the promises and what we promoted. I worked with her as a mayor, was the first mayor in partnership with her to start hiring people with intellectual disabilities. And candidly, we even struggled in San Francisco outside of the mayor's office to get other departments to hire folks. I know even up here in Sacramento, we didn't do as much as we could or should. And frankly, I don't think there has been the kind of resolve since she left in this space. And so I think the most important thing we can do, and there are a lot of organizations, imagine a number of you represented here today, in fact substantively so, that are in this space doing good work every single day. You need more partners, you need more support, and you need some statewide goals. You need some leadership out of the executive branch to frankly demand that agencies do the right thing. And there are not just agencies in Sacramento proper, but those that are represented all across the state of California that could be doing more, not as charity, but as a big part of their strategic plan. Because one thing you learn quickly is the asset that is brought into the workforce, the extraordinary talents that avail themselves, and how the spirit and pride of your organization is increased and improved because of those employment opportunities. And so we've got to change that mindset to something you have to do, to something that you should be doing for all the right reasons, because it will inspire and enliven and ultimately produce results that make going to work and make quality of your experience much more enlivening.
Right. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the state of California, more than 500,000, more than 300,000 that we know of that we serve. You add their parents, you already add 1 million constituents. You add the direct support professionals which support them, and maybe a sibling or two, and quickly at 1.5 million. Yet individuals with developmental disabilities are constantly struggling for their civil rights and even human rights in California and throughout the world. How have you shown a commitment to fighting for those types of rights for people?
I'm a Sarge Shriver Democrat. He's the Kennedy you forgot about. He was a Kennedy in law. And I say that because, he sort of captures the spirit of my why. He had a great sense of idealism. He brought us VISTA, legal aid to the poor, the Peace Corps. He waged the war on poverty when we actually were winning that war on poverty. He co-founded with his wife the Special Olympics. He was president of Special Olympics. He was passionate about people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And his why was standing up for ideals and striking out against injustice. That's why I'm here. Not just in my life as an elected official, but that's my why outside of my day job in elected office. And so I'm always going to stand up for the little person. I'm always going to stand up for the person being bullied. I'm going to always stand up for folk that are being left behind. Reason I got involved in a lot of issues, from marriage equality back in the day to issues around homelessness and housing, which I'm passionate about, and brain health issues. I don't talk about mental health, I talk about brain health, and issues that sort of drive my sense of idealism. And so I think California has a unique role and responsibility. Look, we're the birthplace of the ADA movement. Bay Area, right? Substantively so. My first appointment, by the way, when I became mayor, my first appointment was someone to replace me in county supervisor, Michaela Alioto-Pierre, who was in a wheelchair, and I did that substantively because she was the most qualified person, but also it sent a big, powerful message. I also made the point, as someone, as a small business person that was doing the right thing on ADA and upgrading our facilities, that I noticed where I got my inaugural as mayor, it wasn't ADA accessible. We were preaching, but we weren't practicing at the green room at the War Memorial Building. And I actually used my personal money to create a temporary ramp to make a statement of values to the city that you can't preach unless you practice. And so in so many areas, we have a unique role and responsibility in this state to preserve our leadership, to push back against those that want to see that leadership reversed, and to maintain that from a national and, I would argue, international frame. Because in so many ways the world looks to us, looks to all of you. And that is something that's a big part of the core tenet of mine as well. I see California as a movement. I see California as a cause. And if we're not raising the bar, no one else will. And so it's incumbent upon us, on behalf of those 320,000+ people in this state, but the millions of others outside this state that are looking to our leadership.
Thank you. You have a few young kids, I think.
Lots of them.
A gaggle of young kids.
I don't know what happened. So quick.
I have a few myself. I feel you. Yes.
How old are they?
6, 5, and 2.
So you're like me, crazy.
Yeah, right there with you.
I have a 2, 4, 6, 8, and it's great when they're all even ages because it's easy to remember. But yeah, 2 boys and 2 girls, and it's what a gift.
Good work. I'm going to have coffee like you right after this for that exact reason.
Now you know why.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Want to ask you, when it comes to K-12 experience, what would you want your children's experience and exposure to other kids with developmental disabilities to be?
inclusion, 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 inclusion. I had a great experience on Tuesday. Feels like a week or two ago, but it was a few days ago in LA. I'm passionate about 0 to 3. I'm passionate about early brain development. 85% of the brain is fully developed by the time you're 3. The critical importance of screenings, importance of prenatal care. And so I went to a program in Los Angeles, and the teacher right away very proudly says, "Tell me which among our kids are special needs kids." And I said, "It's impossible." She goes, "Exactly." And I said, "That's it. This is exactly the model that we need to advance throughout our K through 12, pre-K through 12 education system." By the way, that wasn't the case when I was going to school. Right. I had a pretty severe learning disability, dyslexia, so much so that I bounced 4 schools in 7 years. And I was in the back parking lot for most of my education experience with all the other kids. We were literally segregated. Now, the gift of that in hindsight was the individualized learning that I received, the customized learning, the self-paced learning that I received that, frankly, none of the other kids received. And it perversely turned out to be a godsend. I had a huge advantage coming out of that. It's the reason I think I'm sitting here today. But it also made me think about all those folks that don't have that kind of support in individualized, customized, self-paced learning, and importance of placing that, but in an inclusive environment. And there's nothing that is lost on me than this. The governor, nothing more, I think, that punctuates the point of the importance of this space than this. And that is the fact that we put $100 million, the governor, up in the budget this year just to deal with the crisis that exists in our K through 12 education system, a special education teachers. Right. 90% of school districts having a hard time finding quality. It's not just, again, we talk about access, we've got to talk quality. But quality educators. We had to put $100 million supplemental in this year's budget just to hold the line. And so I want quality educators like the young woman that I met in LA that understand inclusion, that understand integration, and making sure that we are providing the quality experience, not just for the young child with a developmental disability, but all the other children that are enriched because of that interaction and that experience.
Appreciate that answer very much, and the 0 to 3, and then the K-12, and then we can start talking about post-12, and then talking about adulthood. For more than 50 years, the Lanterman Act has been supporting and been the backbone of the structure of supports and systems for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And for that reason, and for education reasons as well, this community is incredibly impacted by decisions that happen in Sacramento. Every bit of life seems to be touched by the decisions made in Sacramento. If elected governor, what would you do to provide leadership throughout those areas so that we can ensure that for the next 50 years, services and supports and the decisions and the funding made in Sacramento are there for the developmental disability community?
Well, I mean, it's the right answer. I mean, predominantly we're talking about federal dollars and state dollars. Not exclusively, but predominantly. And I recognize in budgets where there's constraints, you are most vulnerable. And if there's nothing I didn't hear more than anything else, the first 3 folks I saw today, don't forget us. And don't forget us particularly when it comes to budget time. And I get that. I mean, we've seen the lawsuits in the past. We have been forced in those frames too many times. And I don't want to be that person. I don't want to create those problems. I get it. I like the continuing move to community-based care and group homes. I'm worried a little bit about the developmental centers shutting down, and particularly people with acute care needs, to making sure we're addressing those acute care issues. So we've got to be careful about that. And the remarkable thing about Frank Lanterman, I mean, your namesake, is he got it and got it done. Pat Brown got it, sort of initiated things in the mid-'60s, before '69, and then of course we extended beyond that in '73. But we've never fully fulfilled the vision that was originally advanced of fully funding these alternatives in a culturally competent way. Bottom up, not top down. And so the issue of providing a cultural competency for caregivers, quality, training, providing for providers, which means making sure they're remunerated appropriately, paid appropriately, trained appropriately. That's a big issue. I love that. And I'm not just saying that because I assumed you would support that, but look, if you're going to deal with the provider gap, then you have to provide for providers and make this an attractive profession. And we sit there lamenting about the gap when in fact we are perpetuating that. And so for all the, in there is an answer to your question. I mean, in that bucket is a way of advancing this collective cause. And again, you can't substitute for leadership. Leadership matters. You've got to be passionate about these issues. You can't be sort of intellectually curious about them situationally. You got to promote. You've got to create a culture of appreciation, respect, understanding, enthusiasm, and engagement. You got to get counties and supervisors more engaged. You got to get cities and city managers, mayors more engaged, city councils and leaders more engaged, and the private sector, the chambers, local chambers, the state chamber, to see and seek opportunities to invest in training opportunities and employment opportunities. And again, that's just about plans, and it's about execution, and it's about a vision, it's about goals, and it's about constancy. It's about faith and devotion to the cause of inclusion, not just passivity that so often marks this space.
You mentioned, and then I'm going to hand it over to some other people to ask some questions. In that answer, you discussed the developmental centers and them closing. And with the closure of the developmental centers is going to come the resources that were devoted to the developmental centers as well as the properties themselves. And those are resources, when those savings are realized, could either be gone to the general fund or
the abyss,
or into the abyss, or continue to support the community. I know as a governor you always would have difficult decisions to make as a budget, but if elected governor, what could you say when there are resources available? What would you want to prioritize for the community?
So when I was mayor, out of concern that the general fund had so many suitor priorities, so many people, we created a community living trust fund. And the whole idea of our community living trust fund was to anchor a consciousness around keeping people, I say lovingly and respectfully, out of SNFs, skilled nursing facilities, because San Francisco had significantly invested in Laguna Honda Hospital around the time I was mayor. And there was growing anxiety that we were going backwards towards an institutionalized model and not leaping forward to a community-based model and keeping people in home in particular, as we were talking a moment ago. And so we created a lockbox of sorts. And sorry to sound like Al Gore in that debate when he talked about the lockbox. Didn't go well for Al. But the whole idea was to capture those dollars. And I think the opportunity here with, we were talking about estimated $400+ million to capture those dollars. Let's not miss that opportunity. Because at the end of the day, this is such an under-resourced space already. The last thing we can afford is to miss this opportunity, this window at this hinge moment, to lose that opportunity to lock some of these revenue streams in a way that protects and preserves and enhances the collective cause of all of you here today, and I imagine many of you watching. So I am very intrigued by that prospect and what we can do together to do that. And I think we'd look back, and you talk about a 50-year frame, and we'd mark that as one of the great missed opportunities if we did not do that.
Thank you. You applause on that. Well done. So I'm going to hand it over to people who are much more qualified than myself. I'm going to start with a kick-butt advocate from San Francisco.
Heard of the place.
Already heard from her today. Elizabeth Grigsby, come on up. I know she has a question for you.
Yes.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Yes. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I met you when you were mayor. I have a lot of questions for you, actually. But one of my most important question is, if you become governor, what are you gonna do to make sure affordable housing is for people with disabilities? Because you know yourself, San Francisco, and I'm sure Sacramento too, we have undesirable kind of neighborhoods. And now that the tech booming industry is moving in, like Twitter, they're taking up all the revenues and money, and it's not really spent on people with disabilities. I hate the word developmental disability.
You don't, yeah.
So I'm not gonna say that. But just with people with disabilities, it seems like to me we're being lost in the forefront. People are forgetting about us. So I want to know what you're planning on doing to ensure that people with disabilities have good quality housing.
That's right. I appreciate that, and I think we all would acknowledge this universally. We have a housing crisis in this state, an affordability crisis in this state. We're 49th out of 50th in the number of per capita housing units. Only Utah develops less housing than California. The supply-demand imbalance is projected by at least one estimate to be 3.5 million housing units, 3.5 million housing units short, projected by 2025, compared to where we need to be in order to create some stability and address affordability. We've been producing about 100,000 housing units on an annual basis. We need to be producing close to 400,000 on an annual basis. That's going to require a Marshall-like plan to address this issue. It's housing at all levels and all types and all supports. As you recall, when I was mayor, I was very passionate about supportive housing for homeless. We developed almost 3,000 new housing units for our homeless, many with disabilities. We have to do more and do better. I've laid out some detailed strategies to increase our low-income housing tax credits from 85 million to 500 million over the next 4 years. We have some specific strategies to get some federal waivers on Medi-Cal to provide supportive services. We call it the whole person care strategies that we have laid out, and I hope you'll take a look at that. Some models after what New York has been doing through the state and New York City. It's the New York model that will support people with disabilities substantively. This issue has been a point of neglect for too many administrations. It is the issue I hear more often than any other issue as I travel around this state. You're correct, not just in San Francisco, here in Sacramento, but in Stockton, in Riverside, and I confess I haven't been to Eureka lately, but I assure you if I was up in Eureka, it'd be the same things people were telling me down I was down in Imperial County the other day near the Salton Sea. The number one issue there besides dust was housing costs. It's about as tough as you can get and as rural as you can get. So we're resolved to do more and do better on this. And as I said, we've laid out a very specific strategy. I hope we'll take a look at this, and I'm fully aware of the crisis at hand and the need to do significantly more.
One more thing. You catching my mind when you say you're kind of scared about the DC closing. I know Sonoma State Developmental Center is closing, and I work for Golden Gate Regional Center in San Francisco, and I told my supervisor when Sonoma State closes, I'm gonna be bringing in a bottle of champagne to my office and celebrate the closing because back in the 60s, way before I was born, parents were told if you had a child with a developmental disability, put them in the institution,
Right.
out of sight, out of mind. I don't blame the parents at all. They didn't know any better. They listened to the stupid doctors. But now this is, we're moving into people with disabilities are living longer. We're here and we're gonna be here for the long run. And I don't think none of my peers or myself needed to be in a developmental center, especially when you were told what to wear, when to go to bed,
Yeah.
what to eat.
Yeah.
I have my own apartment. I literally run my own schedule and what I want to eat, when I want to go to bed. I have a job in the community. I thrive in supported living. Could be doing better, and the way they could be doing better is they need more money invested in those agencies. Because you're right, they do hire less than perfect people. If you care about people with disabilities, make sure the money is invested into the disability community. Because like I said, we're not going anywhere, and I'm a force to be reckoned with.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Well done. I love it. Thank you for that.
I said she was a kick butt advocate, I'm telling you.
You made me, George.
I had a small part in it, We have time for just a couple more, so I want to get to those quickly. I want to also ask Betsy Cates, who is a parent, to come up, and also the president of the board of the Arc of California. Ask a question.
Family members often play the role of primary caregivers for their child or sibling with a disability. What proposals do you have to better support families whose work and devotion make it possible for their loved ones to remain at home?
It's very personal for me. My Aunt Cindy, my cousin Charlie's got autism, and I've watched not just Charlie struggle, and he's thriving now, by the way, unbelievable, proving anything is possible, because when he was young, I never imagined that. But I watched my aunt struggle, and for the family, it was profoundly difficult, and she, as a consequence, was the full-time caregiver. She couldn't have extra work. She basically gave up her career to raise them. And I imagine there are hundreds of thousands of other parents, maybe yourself included, that were struggling with the same. And so, you think about that, and I've talked to Cindy about this forever. I mean, Obviously, the support in terms of supplementing that support, making sure caregivers can supplement, profoundly important. Making sure that we have access to that. Making sure that the school system we talked about forever in terms of integration, et cetera. Issues of family leave, the issues of making sure that the support structures are in place, making sure that the training and the mentorship and advice and counseling is also available for some of the parents and caregivers that are struggling. I'm a huge supporter, by the way, of IHSS, which has been a program when I was mayor in the middle of the recession. We significantly increased wages at the county level to allow people that particularly are family members to provide that care in a way where they were supplemented and paid for that care as another extension of that. And I imagine you have very specific ideas as well. And I'm curious what you think we should be doing more to help support you and others in your position.
Well, at the ARC and along with all of our partners here, regional centers, all the community service providers, we certainly spend a lot of time thinking about that, and we do have ideas, and look forward to the opportunity to share those with you.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And we'll get to one more, and then maybe one time for one from online or so.
Sounds good.
And how about Amy Wessling from the Association of Regional Center Agencies?
Thank you so much. California's developmental services system was founded on the idea of having local regional centers work with service providers to meet local needs. What experiences have given you the best understanding of the importance of responsive and innovative locally based ideas?
Well, being a former county supervisor, being a mayor, having a mom who was deeply invested in this space, as I extended having family members, a cousin who's got autism and has been struggling, and family members that are struggling as parents and caregivers to support their children. All of those things have sort of shaped an appreciation and understanding beyond my professional role as a former mayor and obviously now lieutenant governor and as a candidate for governor that's been made more aware and sensitive. In addition to my support for community-based organizations and large-scale nonprofits, as I noted, a number of them from Best Buddies to organizations like the Special Olympics, where I've been an active participant for many, many years. All of those things, I think, inure to an appreciation and understanding, but always a frame, again, bottom up, not top down, which is a core value for me, perhaps disproportionately because I came from local government. I don't see the world standing up. I see the world standing on my head.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You'll have to translate the standing on your head.
We had 3 questions from Joanna Thompson, Eric Rodriguez, and Peony Ford, and all 3 are related to employment. All 3 of them are
Good.
talking about graduate, postgraduate, and transition into employment. In California, we have a policy which we made recently, which is employment first. When a person is coming out of high school and into the community, we're not talking about a day program or this or that. We're talking about getting them a job.
Yep.
Can you speak to either policies or ideas or ways that you would bring leadership to increase employment?
Well, I know we touched on this before, and I know we talked about neurodiversity and all these issues related to workforce and WIBs and some of the local efforts and regional efforts that have taken shape, DOR's work on this, and obviously the partnerships with CBOs and nonprofits that are doing really good work here. The problem is we lack intentionality at the state level, and you have some good legislative leadership on this. You do. You've got legislative leaders that are, some of them are enthusiastic about this, but you need a governor that convenes all of these groups, sets some audacious goals, holds folks accountable to achieving those goals. You've got to engage the private sector in a much more robust way, which frankly is the missing piece here, candidly. I'm a small business owner. I've been privileged to start 23 small businesses. And so I think I have a unique capacity and appreciation, seeing the world with that set of eyes, as well as being in public service, to be able to bridge that gap and to advance that cause. And as someone that's hired individuals with, for forgive me, developmental or intellectual disabilities, just disabilities. I will change my nomenclature. So people with disabilities, I also have some direct experience with that. And I just think there's an opportunity to dust off some of the enthusiasm that seemed to exist 8, 9, 10, 11 years ago and bring that back with a different kind of energy that is a bit, it's long overdue.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to, excuse me, breaking news. Yeah.
What is it? Donald Trump tweet? God bless us. What is it?
I'm going to have one more question from the audience, and then we'll give you a chance to wrap up. That sounds good. We're going to have Jackie Dillard-Foss, who is CEO from Step Agency, a provider here in Sacramento, actually, ask a question.
It's critically important, so I wanted to have this opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm also on the board of the California Supported Living Network. So service providers are obviously dedicated to doing the job we're doing, but right now the state has frozen rates. So when you're looking at counties that institute local minimum wages, there's no system in place for the providers to offset those costs. As business costs go up, nothing is happening. And obviously for us, without our workforce, DSP wages are frozen. We are struggling.
Yeah.
So 40% turnover rate. So my question for you is, would you go and advocate for businesses to be able to have rates that reflect these local minimum wages, plus the business costs that we're faced with?
You know, it's easy for me, and it's not. For some, you may think I'm just being flippant and indulgent by saying yes, but I say yes because this, quite literally, substantively, has been a big part of my adult life, is addressing this issue, because I was a county supervisor and mayor of one of the most expensive cities in the world, not just in the state of California or the United States. So this issue was front and center in every budget conversation that I ever had. And so I intimately understand the cost differentials and the need to address those issues in a very different way. One size does not fit all. That's why, again, it's bottom up, not top down. And we have to be nuanced in terms of how we approach the financing of these programs. And as an advocate, a strong advocate, as a mayor that left the city with the highest minimum wage in the United States, as the first statewide official with Betty E., first two to support the $15 minimum wage, I also feel part of the problem. And so I intimately appreciate the frame of your question around the $15 minimum wage and the pressure as we phase that in over the next few years, 2020, 2021, that pressure that's going to be placed not just on the state general fund budget that has to commensurately be increased, but on the budgets of nonprofits and service providers that will feel that same pressure and expect ways, or at least are hopeful to find ways of getting support to offset those costs.
Well, it's really, when you have a 50% turnover rate in our field, and you're talking about employees, I have employees in the room that have maybe 10 to 15 years, and there's no way to recognize compaction, and then you have local minimum wages. Some areas it's 60 to 70% turnover rate.
Yeah, it's
You're
crazy.
not going to get quality with that. So
No,
thank you.
and the perversity of that, as you know better than anyone, is you end up spending much more money on the turnover than you would if you address the compaction issues and you address the funding issues up front.
Thank
So,
you.
amen.
Last question, then I'll let you close. California's demographics obviously are shifting culturally, languages, and especially within our community as well. And we as a community are trying to meet that need and want to know what makes you especially qualified to lead California and govern the changing demographics and changing cultures and how it can impact our community as well.
Yeah, I mean, nature nurture, I come from one of the most diverse cities in the most diverse state, California, and the world's most diverse democracy, the United States. And I've long looked at the world from the lens of cultural competency. It's not new language for me. It's part of my value proposition. And I come from a city that started to learn about cultural competency, particularly around the HIV and AIDS epidemic, where we started developing community-based care in a very culturally competent way. And I see that through the lens of all policy making and certainly the application of policy through the distribution of resources. And so that's a big part of who I am and what I believe in and what I value. I also recognize that from a demographic perspective, not only is this a majority-minority state with 27 million of us that are foreign-born, 39% of us that are Hispanic, but we're also a state of asylum for 112,000 refugees over the last 15 years, 1,454 Syrian refugees last year, which is just a point of pride that often is not brought up, particularly in light of Supreme Court conversations and Trump and Trumpism. And so I'm going to push back aggressively to resist the assault on our values. I think it's what makes California great is our ability not just to tolerate that diversity, accelerate it, but I also recognize a demographic trend that we don't talk enough about, and that's an aging ingrained population. And in the next 10 years, by some estimates, 2017 to 2027, the next 10 years, we're going to see net population increase. 65 and over is going to increase by 78%. We're actually going to see a decline in the number of young folks. And that's what some refer to, forgive me, I know this vernacular not a lot of people agree with, but they call it the silver tsunami. At least economists do. Some don't like that. I'm part of that silver tsunami, so I feel I can get away with saying it. And we are not prepared to meet the needs of our aging ingrained population. We have an LVN crisis, an RN crisis today. We do not have, some estimates, we're already bedlocked in terms of facilities. We want to keep people out of SNFs. We want to keep people out of institutions. And that's why IHSS is so important. That's why supporting community-based, culturally competent community-based care is so important. And addressing these demographic shifts is to be a foundational framework in terms of the advocacy support of the next governor. And so I express all that as a way of expressing an appreciation for your question and an appreciation for the importance of that question in terms of the next governor demonstrably embracing the spirit of it and advancing a real cause around addressing the demographic shifts in a very different and nuanced way. So that's my commitment to all of you. I'm grateful for your leadership, your example. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I thank you all for the privilege of being here and the ability to engage others that couldn't be here physically with us. And I just want you all to know that I believe in two-way conversations, and I'm grateful we had that opportunity to dialogue today, but not just on campaigns. And I think the most important thing in closing that the next governor can do, and I learned this as mayor, is appoint people to key commissions, appoint people to key agencies, because a governor can't be everywhere all the time. And decisions are being made every day that directly impact the lives, not only your lives, but the lives of literally hundreds of thousands of others. And that means we have to have people with experience, people with the background, people with the knowledge to understand those that are being impacted by those decisions. And that means you need to be part of that decision making. And so I want you to know that I fully am committed to that process. And hopefully, if I can get through this next few weeks, past June 5th, get into that runoff, survive all those billionaires that are spending money and knock me out, and get through November, and get into a transition. We would begin in a transition to shape that conversation, not wait till January to shape that conversation, and get your advice and counsel on who should be on that transition, who should be front and center in terms of evaluating the current employees in this state so that we can make decisions about who should stay and who should be provided new opportunities and pastures, and then look to get folks in there with some new vigor and new energy into key commissions, agencies, and departments. So I'm grateful to all of you, and thank you for this opportunity.
Lieutenant Governor, thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.